Good morning. Thank you, guys. That's beautiful. Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. I like to kind of start with a story, and this one is about a man who goes into his golf club, and he goes to the bar and he orders a whiskey, and he takes a sip of the whiskey, and he hears this voice. It says, "Beautiful tie." He looks around. He doesn't see anybody there except the bartender, so he takes another sip, and he hears another voice. It says, "Beautiful shirt." He looks around. He doesn't see anybody except the bartender, so he calls the bartender over and says, "I think I'm going crazy. I hear these voices that are saying nice things to me." And the bartender says, "It's the peanuts." He says, "What do you mean it's the peanuts?" The bartender says, "They're complimentary." I know. My congregation has to endure these terrible jokes. So the reason I told that is because I want to be complimentary to Reverend Richard and Reverend Vicki. They have been great friends to my wife and I for many years, and we've admired them and watched this church grow, the renovations, watched your wonderful outreach programs, and they've been great friends. And I hope you realize what a great leader Richard is in the Unity movement. Do you know that? He's really one of the key visionary leaders in the Unity movement, so you're very fortunate and blessed. So as I said earlier in the morning today that I was conflicted about coming here today. Richard asked me to come, and this is the 1-year anniversary of the tragic events in Charlottesville, as you know. And so all week long we've been having prayer vigils and all sorts of meetings and memorials and memorandum. Today there have been marches, and yesterday there were marches. Our city is in an undeclared state of martial law. So it was conflicting for me to leave today. But also I wanted to speak about the power of love. That seems appropriate, and what it means to have love in action, to be love in action. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. There was a 16th century mystic, Spanish mystic, named John of the Cross. He said, "You might quiet the whole world for a second if you pray, but if you really love, our guns will wilt." And Charles Fillmore, Unity's co-founder, wrote that in Divine Mind, love is the power that joins and binds in divine harmony the universe and everything in it. So love, as we know, is far more than an emotion. It's far more than a feeling, just a feeling. In 1 John, we read, "My dear children, let's not just talk about love, let's practice real love. This is the only way we'll know we're living truly in God's reality. It's also the way to shut down debilitating self-criticism, even when there's something to it. For God is greater than our worried hearts and knows more about us than we do ourselves." This is a translation from a Bible called The Message. I really love that expression. God is greater than our worried hearts. And so the question is, what if we are designed specifically to be love in action, to demonstrate love in action? What if we are the instruments through which God or universal spirit or source energy or Hashem or whatever you call God, what if we are the instruments for that expression of love in the world? And what if that's our sole purpose, really? What if our sole purpose is not only to discover love and power of love, but to demonstrate it in our lives as well? And I know that feels like a tall order. It feels overwhelming at times. And as we know, Jesus taught radical love. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I struggle with the idea of having to love our enemies, especially when I see Nazis and racists marching down my streets with long guns and riot gear, especially. How do we love our enemies? And it's not just on these occasions that we see this demonstration of hate going on. It's in our everyday life, right? Someone cuts you off when you're driving, someone is standing at the head of the line and complaining, and it's holding everything up. I have to love my insurance guy who was really nasty to me when I broke a tooth on a potato chip. You know, there was a rock in the potato chip bag, and I had to pay $900 for a crown, and I have to love that insurance guy, that nasty guy. It's a challenge. So Jesus said to shower the people you love with love. This is a test. It was James Taylor. All right. Jesus said, try loving people that are not so easy to love. That's our challenge, isn't it? To love people that are not so easy to love. And he was calling us up to be the expression of this radical love. So you have heard the story of the Good Samaritan many times before, probably, and I want to just read a little bit of it. This is from the Message Bible. It says, just then a religious scholar stood up with a question to test Jesus. Teacher, what do I need to do to get to eternal life? And Jesus answered, what's written in God's law? How do you interpret? And the scholar said, that you love the Lord your God with all your passion and prayer and muscle and intelligence, and that you love your neighbor as yourself. Good answer, said Jesus, do it and you will live. But looking for a loophole, the scholar said, and just how would you define your neighbor? And that's where the story of the Good Samaritan comes in. So you know the story that the man is robbed, and he's lying by the side of the road, and a Levite and a priest come by, and they walk by. They don't want to get involved. And then the Samaritan walks by, and he does get involved, and he treats the guy, and he heals the wounds, and he puts oil, and he puts him on his donkey, and he takes him to the inn. And so he really turned out to be a great guy. Now, in the interpretations of the story, we know that this takes place in a 17-mile stretch between Jerusalem and Jericho called the Way of Blood, because it was a really dangerous passageway during ancient times. And it's a wonderfully subversive story because Jesus turns the conventions of the day completely upside down. Right? We have the Samaritans who were despised as outcasts and being impure by the Jewish people of that time. And the reason for that was that Samaria was the capital of northern Israel, and northern Israel in 722 BCE was captured by the Assyrians, and the Jews of that time began to intermarry with the Assyrians, and so they were considered by the Jews of the south to be unclean and impure. And then the Assyrians were conquered by the Babylonians, and the Jewish people went into exile in Babylonia. And when they came back in about 538 BCE, the Samaritans were not allowed to work on the Jewish temple, to rebuild the Jewish temple, because they were thought to be unclean and impure. So in this story, you have the priest and the Levite, holy people, who don't want to get involved. Actually, they're doing what is right for them according to Jewish law of that time, because the Jews and the Levites and priests were not permitted to touch a half-dead body because it would make them ritually unclean to perform the rituals that they needed to do. So they were adhering to Jewish law. There's nothing bad about that. They were just adhering to Jewish law. But then the Samaritan comes along, and he becomes the hero of the story. He decides to get involved. And of course, the message that we always get from this wonderful story is that love is the first law. Love is the most powerful force in the universe. Love does not know boundaries, does not know nationalities, does not know prejudice. Love is the first law. And everyone is our neighbor because we're all one in spirit. We're all children of God. So look at all of the ways that the Samaritan demonstrated radical love. It's really quite amazing. First of all, he decides to help this man out without regard to his own personal safety. He didn't know if the robbers were still around. They could have come out of the bushes and attacked him too. He didn't care. He saw something, saw a need, and he went to help. Secondly, he stops and goes out of his way. He may have had something to do. He probably was walking somewhere. He was walking through the way of blood, right? This dangerous road. He had to go somewhere. So he stopped anyway to help this person in need. He pours expensive oil on the man. He puts him on his own donkey. He takes him to the inn. He pays the innkeeper money, 2 denarii, which is the equivalent of 2 days' wages, which is a lot of money back then. And he tells the innkeeper, you know what, whatever this guy needs, take care of it, and I will take care of the bill when I get back. So he's willing to pay more money even when he comes back. He was a really great guy. So the question is, what does this story mean to you and I? What does it mean to us now, today, especially at this particular time and on this particular day? You know, this time when immigration is a flashpoint in our society, when we have hateful and spineless politicians, corrupt politicians, when we have racism and social injustice, not just in Charlottesville, not just in Washington, D.C. today. Today is not the only day this stuff occurs. It happens in thousands of cities and towns around our country every day. Social injustice, racial inequality. But particularly on this one-year anniversary of Charlottesville, which of course for me has meaning. You know, we were part of the clergy group standing outside of Heather Heider's funeral last year as a shield against potential racists and Nazis who were going to come and try to disrupt the funeral. That's what the clergy was doing last year. So where do we begin to even think about who is our neighbor? And how can I best be a bestower of neighborly love? How can I be love in action? And I think you'd agree that there is a lot of suffering in the world. If we could have the next slide. In 2018 today, 793 million people are hungry. That's about 11% of our planet. And if we go to the next slide, in 2015, it would have taken only $30 billion to feed every hungry man, woman, and child on the planet. The U.S. defense budget alone that year was $598.5 billion. There's enough money in the world to feed everybody. There's enough resources in the world. There's enough abundance in the world. And I'm not sure there's enough love yet. So who is our neighbor? What does it mean to be neighborly? There was a 17th century Indian poet named Tukaram. And Tukaram said, "I could not lie anymore, so I started to call my dog God. First, he looked confused. Then he started smiling. Then he even danced. I kept at it. Now he doesn't even bite. I am wondering if this might work on people." See, what if we saw each other as expressions of God and really acted on that? You know, what if we really appreciated spiritual love, agape love, universal love? What if we did what the author Victor Hugo said when he wrote, when you love another person, you see the face of God. That's the power of love. And the Course in Miracles calls this the holy encounter, if we could put that slide up. The Course in Miracles says, as you see the other person, you will see yourself. As you treat him, you will treat yourself. As you think of him, you will think of yourself. Never forget this, for in him, or her, I'll add, you will find yourself or lose yourself. So, if God is expressing and unfolding in the other person, then when we don't like something that they're doing, when we don't like the way they're behaving, when something that they do ticks us off, we can say, I'm having a little trouble with the way you're unfolding today, right? Now, where is the responsibility if I do that? If I say, I'm having a little trouble with how you're unfolding today, the trouble is with me. I'm having the trouble of the way you're unfolding. What if radical love is about accepting the pace of another person's unfolding? Let me say that again. What if radical love is accepting the pace of the other person's unfolding? Now, this means that I know something about them that they may not know. I know that no matter what they're doing, no matter how they're behaving, no matter what the outer appearance, no matter how wounded they are or sick they are, and I make an assumption, this is my growing edge, that these Nazis and racist folks are deeply wounded. What if the past for them that we know the essence is love? We know the essence of who they are, the essence of love, the essence of wholeness, the essence of God. And what if acknowledging someone's wholeness, calling their wholeness forth, is really what radical love is all about, really what true healing prayer is all about. And so my prayer becomes for the difficult child, for the arrogant or difficult coworker or annoying employer or the homeless person, or the person that I love that's in the hospital, or my family and my loved ones, or nations that are at war, or even the racists and the Nazis who inhabit my city and yours, that we know something about them. And what we know is that we can affirm that wholeness of their being. So our affirmation becomes, I affirm the wholeness of your being, I affirm the wholeness of your spirit, I affirm the wholeness of your wisdom, I affirm the wholeness of your intelligence, I affirm the wholeness of your desire to live in peace and happiness, I affirm that you now draw energies to you that fulfill that promise of wholeness that is your birthright as a beloved son or daughter of God. Now, does this mean that we should roll over and be passive in the face of social injustice? Absolutely not. It means that we follow our inner guidance and we do what is ours to do. So, as clergy, and for clergy all of this week, we've been having interfaith prayer meetings, and there are prayer meetings today, and there are marches and all sorts of things going on. And some people are drawn to more activist kinds of things. We know in Unity that you have all of the wisdom and guidance that you need within you to do what is yours to do. But what causes trouble on our planet is that we forget. We forget. We talk about this in Unity a lot, that spiritual ignorance is feeling separated from source, feeling separated from God, feeling separated from abundance, feeling separated from love. When we get that way, there's always problems, there's always suffering. So Lawrence of Arabia, if we could have that slide, the real Lawrence of Arabia, he took a group of Arabian tribal chieftains to the Paris peace talks in 1918. And it was the first time that many of them had been out of the country, and they were amazed by all of the water everywhere. There were rivers and streams and fountains and bathtubs, and Lawrence would always find them splashing around in water. And when it came time for them to leave, Lawrence found them dismantling the faucets from their bathrooms, thinking that they could take the water with them. Right? True story. So they mistook the faucet for the source of the water. And we do that too, I think, sometimes, you and I. Sometimes we forget where our source is, what our source is, that our source is within us, the Christ consciousness, the Christ potential within us. And that all of our different things that we do in Unity, our prayers and meditations and seminars and affirmations and denials, all of these different things are designed to trigger a response from within us, right? So that we remember our source, we remember our wholeness. So I want to end with a story, a true story, about our Good Samaritan and the power of love. And it's from an article that was written in the Wall Street Journal several years ago by Brian Grewley. And it occurs during World War II in Nazi Germany. There was a 16-year-old teenager named Mieczysław Wajensberg, and he was captured by the Nazis near the end of the war. He was taken to concentration camps in Auschwitz and Buchenwald and Dachau. And 2 days after he got to Dachau, the Americans liberated the camp. And Mieczysław and all of the refugees were taken to a former SS barracks in Munich. And Mieczysław was weak, he was gaunt, he had ribs. You've seen the photos of these folks. He was ribs poking out of his body and all this stuff. And he ran away from the camp. And he came upon an all-African-American Army unit. The Army, of course, was segregated in those days. And they took him in. Lieutenant John Withers was the commanding officer. He knew that he would get in trouble if anybody found out about it. He'd be dishonorably discharged, he'd lose his ability for formal education, all of this stuff. But they took him in anyway. He was in need, and they took him in. And he and this Army unit became great friends with Pee Wee. They kept him for over a year so that he could get his strength back. And Pee Wee learned English, he learned gospel music, he learned baseball, and he talked about going to America one day and all of that. And after a while, he got strong again, and so he moved back into a city, and he got a job, and he moved into an apartment. And in 1946, after the war, Lieutenant Withers and his men went back to the U.S. They were honorably discharged. Lieutenant Withers went on to university, got a PhD, became a university professor. And he never forgot Pee Wee. He always talked about Pee Wee and the story of Pee Wee, and he told his sons about Pee Wee. Pee-wee, on the other hand, never spoke about his past, never spoke about the camps. His grandchildren would ask, "What is that number on your arm?" And he would just say, "Bad people did that." 50 years later, Lieutenant Withers' son, John Jr., was now working in the State Department in Germany. He got curious about Pee-wee. He decided to be a detective and track him down. So he looked through the registries, the Holocaust registries in Germany and Israel, and he actually found Pee-wee. He found Pee-wee living in Hartford, Connecticut, and he changed his name to Martin Wiegand. And so he called the phone number that he had, and Pee-wee's daughter answered the phone. And John Jr. said, "Is Pee-wee still alive?" And the daughter said, "Yeah, he's right here." And so 3 weeks later, Lieutenant Withers got on a plane to Hartford and went to the Hartford airport. He was 84, Pee-wee was 72, and this is them meeting at the airport. And they held hands the whole weekend. They told stories. They shared stories with their families. It was just a great expression of love between the two families. It was an amazing experience. And after that time, the family stayed close together, a black family and a white family. And they continued this for many years. But in 2003, Lieutenant Withers made one final trip to Hartford. Pee-wee had died of colon cancer at the age of 75. And at the funeral, Pee-wee's daughter stood up and she told everyone how grateful she was that this Lieutenant Withers and this African-American unit, the segregated unit, many people from the South who had taken in this Jewish Holocaust teenager survivor. She expressed how grateful she was and how it had been a new beginning for not only her family, but for generations of her family. And then Lieutenant Withers rose to speak, and he spoke about how Pee-wee had changed his life and the life of his men, and how his gentle manner had encouraged them, and how his strength and resilience had encouraged them all. And finally, he recited a song to the lyrics to a song that Pee-wee had loved. And if we could just play that song. Day is done gone, the sun, from the lakes, from the hills, from the sky. All is well, safely rest. God is nigh. Pee-wee's favorite song. And a real example of a good Samaritan, of love in action and the power of love, not just for one person, not just for one generation, but for entire generations. That's the power that we have, and the power of love. So we have a time of meditation now. I'm going to invite you just to close your eyes for a